up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today I am rebooting a video. I haven't done this in at least 3, probably 4 or more months, so give me a break. I forgot that I had this one, and this case really interested me. I saw another YouTuber do it, and I also saw something about it on the Dr. Phil show when it was all going on, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like, this world is getting crazy. Guys, I'm pretty sure this is going to be a long one, so buckle in. As always, let me know what you think in the comments at the end of all of this. This one's crazy. I recorded it way back in the beginning of my channel, maybe like a year ago. It was like the 4th or 5th video I ever did. So let's see if I can do it a little bit better justice this time, when I'm not so jerky and squeaky and stuttery. Not that I'm much better now, right? This is the case of Andrew Burd, a foster child who was salt poisoned. Was it murder or an accident? You tell me what you think. Let's jump right in. Hannah Sands was the daughter of Reverend Benny Sands, an evangelical preacher in Corpus Christi, Texas, and Lane Sands, a homemaker. She was the oldest of 2 children. Larry Overton and his family were members of her father's congregation when they were young. Hannah was always a very devoted Christian, and she had a heart for those in need from a very young age. She always wanted to be a part of the boisterous, large families she saw all around her in church growing up. She seemed to always have a deep sense of community and family, sort of like it was ingrained in her from a really young age. Hannah's life seemed to everyone around her perfectly normal for a preacher's daughter. She absolutely loved going to church and Sunday school and quickly made friends with most of the other children in her father's small congregation. However, Hannah and her family were basically run out of Corpus Christi very suddenly when in 1984, her father, Reverend Sands, was arrested and charged with the murder of a 16-year-old girl who went missing and was found naked and bludgeoned to death on the water's edge of Padre Island. Padre Island is a national seashore/park located just outside of Corpus Christi, Texas, that includes about 70 miles of natural beaches and habitats. Obviously, this fall from grace profoundly affected Hannah's childhood. But despite the pastor's reputation in his congregation, with his family, and in the community, the evidence was irrefutable, with blood from the victim being found in his van and his alibi simply not checking out for the night in question. The Reverend was arrested, charged, and subsequently found guilty of the girl's murder and was sentenced to 23 years in prison, obviously making his presence in Hannah's life non-existent, and I'm sure it was a very palpable loss for the young girl and her family. Hannah's mother, Lane, moved herself and her children to the town of Lindale, Texas, where a missionary committee called the Calvary Commission essentially gave them free room and board in a small but lovely little apartment. Hannah babysat and looked after most of this community's children and grandchildren, whose parents were missionaries who used this campus as a home base between trips abroad. Joe Foss, the commissioner's founder, said later about Hannah, quote, "In all of the years she was here, I can't recall one negative thing being said about her," end of quote. She was captivated as a teenager by the stories of the missionaries and all of the work they did in the name of the Lord, and soon started going on missions herself. Every Christmas from that point on, and Easter as well, was spent at an orphanage where she fell in love and really had a heart for the wards there, who mainly were the unwanted children, products mostly of the prostitutes in the nearby red light districts. Abandoned and seemingly forgotten, Hannah couldn't get enough of spending time with them. Quote, "Some people love stray animals. Hannah was always drawn to stray people," end of quote, said her mother, Lane Sands. I could go on, and while this case is largely about Hannah, and in a way, in my opinion, and in many others, she's also a victim here, this isn't really her story, though. I wanted you to get a sense and feel for the kind of person we're talking about here, because some things are going to raise your eyebrows and make you question her character in the telling of this story. So, enough about Hannah. Let's talk about the real victim here, the little boy who lost his life, Andrew Burd. Andrew Burd was born on July 28, 2002. He was a Leo. There is very little known about Andrew's life before foster care and his time with the Overtons. He was born in Corpus Christi to a 16-year-old mother who had had several drug addictions. She did not quit during her pregnancy, and please don't be so quick to judge, because I'll knock those comments right out. His father was 17 years old and not around much as he worked for a traveling carnival. They still existed in 2002, I guess. It's unknown whether or not he himself had any vices. Even less is known about him than Andrew's birth mother. It's also alleged that the maternal grandmother was addicted to methamphetamines as well. So after 4 reports of abuse and neglect, why did it take 4 investigations to uncover the drug use and abuse and neglect of this little baby boy? Why wasn't CPS called immediately upon him being born, allegedly with more than 5 different substances in his system? That's all I'm going to ask, okay? That's all I'm going to say about that. Why did it take 4 times? I don't know. I don't have the answers. So after 4 reports of abuse and neglect and a trip to the emergency room with little Andrew suffering from a broken arm, CPS was finally called and decided to take the little guy into their custody and start all of the additional trauma of a child being bounced around in a faulty foster care system, in a broken justice system. This happened when he was just 2.5 years old. Andrew started out, as far as my information goes, as a foster child to another member of the Overton's congregation and attended the Sunday school that Larry Overton taught at the church every Sunday with the Overton's other 4 children. Larry and Hannah had always talked about having a large family, at least 6 children, quote, and as we know, Hannah's heart was for the needy, special needs children mostly. They had decided early in their marriage that they wanted to eventually adopt a special needs child, so they knew right away that their large family was going to contain at least 1 non-biological child. In 2005, they really started going forward with the adoption process, which usually takes a super long time, when their daughters would start to ask them if, quote, Andrew from Sunday school could be their new brother, end quote. Apparently, the 2 young girls had heard every week when it was time for prayers that Andrew was always praying for a, quote, forever family and, quote, to be adopted. And I guess taking after their mom, they really wanted to help this little boy who they had grown to know and love. When Larry and Hannah started inquiring about the little boy, they discovered that the church's pastor and his wife were at one point considering adopting the little guy, but after researching into his disabilities and special needs a bit more, they decided it was, quote, more than they can handle, end quote. That should tell you something right there. When it was once again suggested to the Overtons that they should adopt Andrew by his current foster mother and fellow congregation member, the Overtons decided that if anyone could handle this little boy, it was the Overtons. Hannah specifically, because she had an uncanny patience for children. They met the precocious little boy and immediately fell in love and decided he was a perfect fit for their family. As soon as they started this process to foster and then eventually adopt little Andrew, Hannah found out she was pregnant again as well. So, this would be 5 biological children and then Andrew, plus the 2 parents, all living under the Overton's roof. Keep in mind as well that Larry Overton could barely make ends meet for his family as they were, with just 4 little mouths to feed, as he didn't make much of an income being a landscape lighting technician. I don't know what that is, guys. That's just what it says. It would be agreed that there would be a 6-month foster/trial period before the actual adoption would be finalized. Let's talk for a minute about Andrew's disabilities/special needs and what it all looked like and entailed. What were the Overtons about to take on with fostering and eventually adopting this already troubled child? I want to also make it known that several members of the congregation, including the Overtons' pastor and his wife, came forward and warned the Overtons about just how troubled little Andrew was. His known disabilities were as follows: some developmental delays in speech and motor skills. He spoke very slowly and very haltingly, mostly with a stutter, and couldn't put more than a couple of words together at once. He hoarded food, would take food out of the trash. He was described as, quote, a very angry kid, end of quote, and would throw extremely violent temper tantrums over the smallest little things. He would also hide food in random places throughout the house. These are the most noticeable and reported on issues the little boy had going into this arrangement with the Overtons, and they were made aware of all of it right from the door and decided that they were up for the task and could handle it. They knew it would be tough, but decided that they had the patience, time, and love they thought it would take to help this little kid become a well-adjusted child, even with the non-curable delays he was experiencing, despite being financially strapped and already emotionally stressed. She was pregnant. They already had 4 small children. He was barely making it work financially. But let's adopt a special needs kid, right? We can do it. In the spring of 2006, on Mother's Day to be exact, little Andrew spent his very first night in the Overton home. in an effort to make him happy and to get him even more excited about this huge change, which I'm sure was very scary for this little boy who had been bounced around from foster home to foster home until coming into the Overtons' care. Keep in mind, he was 2.5 when he was put into foster care, and he was about to turn 4 in 2 months from this spring day. They decided to deck out his room and his new belongings all in Spider-Man. The kid had a love of old Spidey, and believe me, kid, I can relate. They went out and brought him Spidey pajamas and blankets, sheets, slippers, toys, even a Spider-Man plate to eat off of. They just went all out for this little boy to make him feel more comfortable in his new surroundings. It was extremely quickly that Andrew seemed to really take to the Overtons. He almost immediately started calling them mom and dad and settling into the family life and routine of the home. It's said that he would literally step on Larry's feet. He followed him around so closely everywhere he went. To the outside world, the neighbors and fellow congregants, it seemed Andrew was really doing so much better. Socially, his interaction with other children in the church was much more positive. His language skills were vastly improving, as now his stutter was almost completely gone, and he was able to not only put more words together and say more words in general, but he was also able to speak in complete sentences from time to time. That's huge, especially for a little boy with his delays. Everyone said what an amazing change they were seeing in little Andrew right from the Overtons' door. Even the adoption supervisor expressed in her report that she was extremely pleased with Andrew's progress in the home and that it seemed to be a perfect fit for all parties involved. However, as we know, outside appearances can be, and in my experience, usually are deceiving. Inside the Overton home was a completely different story. While Andrew was genuinely making all of these amazing and positive changes, it also wasn't long before he started hoarding food, throwing violent temper tantrums, hiding food, eating food out of the trash. So all of the behaviors it was said he had going into this process seemed to be not only still present, but getting worse by the day. The Overtons also noticed that at now 4 years old, Andrew related to and played more with their 2-year-old than with their 4-year-old, and was still very severely developmentally delayed, his motor skills especially. They knew they had a long road to recovery and success ahead, but were not discouraged even by these extreme and seemingly bizarre behaviors. I mean, they did know about most, if not all, of these issues and agreed to take him in anyway, so they should be okay with it and be patient with it, in my opinion. Andrew also had some physical problems, with Hannah saying that he was extremely clumsy. Remember how his motor skills were severely delayed as well, right from the beginning, due to how he was born, and probably, this is speculation, the neglect and abuse he endured for the first 2.5 years of his life. Andrew was so clumsy, in fact, that Hannah made him wear an inflatable life vest in their toddler pool, and while it wasn't said in anything I found and read in this case outright, it seems that there was some ADD, ADHD involved here, as it was stated by Hannah that, quote, Andrew never stopped moving and was a very busy child, end of quote. I personally don't know anything about ADD or ADHD. I don't want to say I don't believe in it in children or toddlers this young, because I don't want to get attacked in the comments, but I don't really believe in it in kids that young. That's just my opinion. I think doctors are too quick to diagnose regularly, regular supercharged toddlers, especially little boys with these conditions. And it's just my opinion. Come for me if you want. I'm all up in the comments. Out of all these issues and problems, though, the most disruptive to the family and the most frustrating to the parents especially were the food issues. At this point, he wasn't just hoarding and eating from the trash, but it was so bad they weren't even able to take him along on simple errands like running to the store or really out of the house at all to do anything, because he was now eating off of random floors. In stores with any kind of food on the shelves, Andrew would just randomly open things up and start eating from containers. One time he went so far as to try to peel up gum stuck to the sidewalk and concrete and eat that, and he did this on multiple occasions. He would get up in the middle of the night and start hoarding and hiding food in his room and in random places all around the house. He would eat cigarette butts and ashes from the ashtray or ground, and even started chipping paint off the walls in the home and consuming that as well. So, as you can probably imagine, this kid was a headache and an accident just waiting to happen. However, it's mentioned that Hannah had a background in nursing, although I have to say I did dig a little bit deeper to try to see when she had time for this nursing degree. Nothing I read about her early life before marrying Larry or even after getting married that said anything about or confirmed this, so I don't know where that came from, but the statement becomes extremely important later on when her actions during the incident that caused his death were called into question. So some of her reactions and actions that day would be possibly understandable for a regular person not trained medically. So they would be understandable, let me reiterate, for a person who is not trained medically, but not so much for someone with a background in a medical field. It's very confusing, and I wish I could have found verification of this medical background, but unfortunately I could not. I would also like to make it clear that I did come across several articles stating that these strange behaviors surrounding food are extremely common in foster children, especially ones so young. There's no specific information on how many foster homes Andrew was in before being placed with the members of the congregation that the Overtons took over for in 2006, and also how he was treated in those homes, however many there were. No matter how much Andrew ate, he was always immediately afterwards saying he was hungry and begging for more food. If he was denied this request, he would go into extremely violent temper tantrums that the Overtons eventually said made them start to worry for their other children in the home. At first, the doctors told his parents that the eating and tantrums were a behavioral issue and not a medical one, and they were even shown statistics by the adoption specialist / supervisor stating that almost all children that go through this do indeed eventually grow out of it. This seemed to reassure the family, at least for a short while. Eventually, though, the constant eating of non-food items such as cat food, cat litter, cigarette butts, he even started eating pieces of the carpet in the home and wherever they were outside of the home. So if they took him somewhere, he would do these eating behaviors, chipping paint off the walls, eating from the carpet, eating from the litter box at other people's houses as well. The eating didn't stop wherever they were. It didn't matter if they were out in public or home in their house. Andrew never stopped these behaviors, and eventually the Overtons weren't so convinced that these were not medical issues that he'd eventually outgrow. I mean, it had been going on for so long at this point. I'm sure they started to feel desperate and maybe discouraged and probably even hopeless at times. But that's my own speculation. How they feel or felt about it, I don't really know. I can only imagine, right? Side note, guys, so I wrote this, like I said, about a year ago, and there's a little piece missing from the script. Hannah had gotten into a car accident with the children in the car. She suffered really severe whiplash. None of the kids had any injuries, but it seemed to have had an effect on Andrew because his behaviors, for as bad as they were, got like 100 times worse. The details aren't in here. It just goes from my speculation about how they're feeling to immediately following the accident. However, one by one, all of the people initially willing to help with the care of the children very quickly regretted the decision to do so and basically quit, wholly and completely due to their inability to handle young Andrew and all of his bizarre behavior and violent tantrums. Since the accident and the basic abandonment of any and all persons of support for the family, Andrew's obsession with food just became even worse than it already was, which is hard to imagine from what I've been telling you, I know. So after this accident that Hannah had, she was on bed rest, and neighbors, people from the church, the congregation, family members, friends, anybody you can think of in the community were coming together and offering help, but they could not handle Andrew. They just really couldn't deal with anything about him. They all would just quit. They would just watch them for a few hours. You know, some would stay for the entire day and be like, yo, I can't do this. Some would just leave in the middle of the day after like an hour of dealing with him. So that's got to be really hard too, because now the family is alienated. Hannah is, you know, in a lot of pain and on bed rest. Larry has to work to feed all these people, you know, all these kids, and his wife, take care of his family. And it sounds crazy. One morning, Larry decided that he was going to just let Andrew eat as much as he wanted. I speculate that this was for either one of two reasons, or perhaps both. The first being that he wanted to teach Andrew a lesson, possibly making him throw up and realize he's eating himself sick and make him want to stop, and or the second reason possibly being that he was hoping that Andrew would finally be full and realize there is enough food, and this would make him stop asking to be overfed. I don't know what gave Larry this idea after all of this time. Maybe it was the camera the parents placed in little Andrew's room at night to make sure he wasn't continuously going into the refrigerator when everyone else was sleeping to eat and or hoard food, and actually catching him eating the foam from his mattress because he couldn't get to the refrigerator. So anyways, Larry on this morning made Andrew a dozen eggs and a whole plate of sausages. I don't know exactly how many, but it says everywhere I look, quote, an entire plate of sausages, end of quote, which Andrew then proceeded to eat. All of it. Throwing up about halfway through the meal and then going back to finish all of the food. Every last bite. After this, eating, then throwing up, and then going back and finishing it all, Andrew still begged actually for more food, insisting he was still hungry and hadn't yet had enough. At this point, his parents had seemingly had enough, and they took Andrew to the adoption therapist and also the specialist and therapist supervisor. This was when it was suggested that maybe Andrew is in fact having a medical condition and not a behavioral issue, as was originally thought by all of these therapists, specialists, and doctors, these experts they've been going to see this whole time. An appointment was made for Andrew to see another medical doctor / professional to be evaluated to see if he had a condition called pica. Pica, by definition, is, quote, craving and chewing, eating substances that have no nutritional value, such as ice, clay, soil, or paper, etc., end of quote. This would include, I guess, mattress foam, cigarette butts, paint off the walls, cat litter, possibly gum off the floors and sidewalks as well, I'm sure. I also read when researching quickly what pica is, quote, pica can have causes that aren't due to an underlying disease. Examples include stress, cultural factors, nutritional deficiencies, or pregnancy, end of quote. Now, obviously young Andrew wasn't pregnant, but I wonder if he was checked for any kind of underlying diseases as well as the above mentioned causes. Sadly, we will never know what the case was here, what the underlying cause was of this very young little boy's eating issues were. Before he had these appointments, his little life was cut tragically short. However, we're not quite there yet. There's more. On October 2nd, 2006, Larry awoke and took everyone to church except Hannah and Andrew so that Hannah could spend some quality time, just her and Andrew, hoping that maybe she could bond with him somehow and gain his trust, because maybe this was a part of what was going on. She was trying everything, right? Larry had made breakfast for everyone, and everyone ate right before he left, including Hannah and Andrew. According to Hannah, immediately after the rest of the family left the house, Andrew started asking for lunch, saying he was basically starving and still hungry. Hannah told him he had to wait until Larry got home because he planned on bringing lunch for everyone with him. Well, our young Andrew did not like this answer, apparently because he went into full-blown toddler tantrum mode, ran into his bedroom, and proceeded to purposely poop all over the floor and smear it all over everywhere. His new bed, his new blankets, the walls, the floors, basically bathed himself in straight up dookie. The parents, once again, because this had happened before many times, had to throw out his bed sheets, clean his mattress off, not to mention clean Andrew himself off. I can't even imagine how frustrating this would be, especially happening over and over and over again. They later came under some fire, though, for how they handled this particular poop situation, because they said, when later asked, that when they'd thrown his sheets away, he would go into the garbage and get them. The reason they had to explain this is because it was later found out that Larry actually burned the sheets, but he didn't just burn them, he burned them on the family's grill. This really confused me at first, but maybe they didn't want him taking the sheets out of the trash again, as he always did, and burn piles weren't legal where they lived, maybe. I don't know, I'm just speculating and trying to understand why parents who are seemingly perfectly reliable, loving, and reasonable up until this point would take this sort of bizarre action. Or maybe they were only human and just so very fed up at that moment in time. I mean, who knows, right? I don't know if I would be able to handle that. They never really were able to explain that themselves. They also came under some heat and fire later on for the fact that since the mattress was now all covered in poop, they had to clean it, and it was wet, and Andrew, for the night of the 2nd, was made to sleep on nothing but the bed frame. And also because instead of bathing him in the bath, in their house, they stripped him down naked and hosed him off in the backyard. I don't understand why people have such a problem with this. It seems like a seemingly reasonable and not too harsh punishment to try and maybe teach him that this behavior is unacceptable and there are consequences for his actions, just as he was also learning about rewards for good behavior. So, why is rewarding okay, but teaching consequences not okay? That's why our country is in the state it's in today, in my opinion. Swiftly moving on. I wouldn't want to get poop in my drain and have it all stink. And then on top of that, if you clean him in the tub, you have to clean off the shower or the tub. Hose his butt off. Hose his butt off. Teach him something. This brings us to the very next day of October 3rd, 2006. Larry went to work early and it was just Hannah, Andrew, and the youngest child left in the home. Now, earlier I saw that Hannah was homeschooling the children, but maybe after having so many kids, the car accident, and so much to handle with Andrew, this stopped and all of the kids who were old enough went to school. It was implied that they went to school, but I'm not 100% sure, but for the sake of time, let's assume the other children were at school and it's just Hannah, Andrew, and the Overtons' youngest child left in the home when Larry went to work early that morning. Hannah was also still in a lot of pain due to the whiplash she suffered in that car accident in the previous month and was still kind of on bed rest, as much bed rest as one can be when you're a stay-at-home parent to two toddlers, one with some serious issues, medical, behavioral, or otherwise, but I digress. So on this morning, after her husband had left and it was just her and the two smallest children in the house, Hannah made breakfast and brought the two toddlers into her bedroom so she could rest while keeping an eye on them. The children were playing and watching cartoons. Hannah said she fell asleep just for a few short minutes, and when she woke up, Andrew was missing from the bedroom. So she said she got up from bed to go look for him, but it didn't really take long to find out where he was. I mean, can you guess where he was? You guessed it. Our young Andrew was, of course, in the kitchen. Now, this next part is a bit strange to me because all that has been reported was Hannah found him in the cabinets, quote, eating, baking ingredients, end quote. As a mother to a toddler myself, I know that it wouldn't matter if every single thing in the cabinet my son got into was edible and perfectly safe, perfectly non-toxic. I would immediately check to see what he had been consuming and, if possible, figure out how much. In my opinion, you never know. However, Hannah did not check to see what Andrew had been eating and just took whatever container he was eating from away from him, put it back into the cabinet, and tried to bring Andrew back into the bedroom to play with his sibling so Hannah could continue relaxing. However, surprise, I know, Andrew started screaming. He was starving and still hungry and was demanding to be given more food. He wanted his lunch. Hannah once again, and as usual, told him no and that he had to wait for lunch time. And once again, Andrew pulled his poop bit in the middle of the kitchen this time, pooping all over himself and rubbing and smearing it everywhere in the room. After Hannah cleaned this entire mess, Andrew was still carrying on and demanding food. So, Hannah decided to give him a sippy cup full of Creole seasoning and water. I'm assuming she did this to try and let the water fill him up so he would stop hounding her for more food, more food, more food, more food. It, of course, didn't work, so Hannah gave him a little more, and he still was throwing this extreme temper tantrum, going full-blown nutbag and demanding even more food or drink or whatever. He was also throwing up at this point, which Hannah said she simply attributed to how full his little belly probably was from breakfast, whatever baking goods he had gotten into for the few minutes she fell asleep and had left him unattended, and the 2 sippy cups full of Creole seasoning and water combined with this screaming, crying, and violent tantrum he was throwing. He was exhausting himself and making himself sick, right? That's what I would think any reasonable parent would think. After about 20 minutes of this, though, Andrew started really seeming like he was struggling to breathe and started exhibiting symptoms of a, quote, sudden flu, end quote. Does this mean fever, chills, etc.? I don't know. It just says sudden flu symptoms. He suddenly fell to the floor and was unresponsive. Hannah said she immediately put him and the other child in the car as fast as she possibly could and drove to the nearest clinic, which she later stated during her interrogation was, quote, just around the corner, end quote. However, upon pulling up into the parking lot of this clinic, Andrew fell into a coma. The doctors, unfortunately, were not able to save him, and the next day, October 4th, 2006, Andrew Burd died in the hospital at the age of 4 years old. So now let's get into the diagnosis, autopsy report, and investigation. The medical examiner who was in charge of young Andrew's body concluded that toxic sodium levels had caused a brain bleed, and test results showed that he had twice the amount of normal sodium levels in his body of an adult human being. The manner of death was stated as, quote, poisoning, end of quote. The officials at the hospital, doctors and nurses, etc., all stated that Andrew, because of the condition of his body, although there was no external bleeding, was most likely the victim of physical abuse and neglect. The medical examiner even went so far as to at first list that Andrew had suffered, quote, blunt force trauma, end of quote, to the head, but later had to change that part of the report because the high sodium levels could have caused the seeming injuries to his head. Because of the medical examiner's determination of cause/manner of death, there was an immediate police homicide investigation into Andrew Burd's death, and Larry and Hannah Overton were told that they were not allowed to re-enter the hospital to be with their foster son. As if this wasn't devastating enough, Larry and Hannah were immediately arrested, and their other 5 children were put in foster homes from CPS, Child Protective Services. When interviewed, the other children all told CPS workers and counselors sent in to interview them that when they misbehaved, their parents would put, quote, spicy stuff, end quote, on their tongues. Hannah later explained that she and Larry did in fact put 1 red pepper flake on the children's tongues when they misbehaved as punishment. Of course, CPS was all up in arms about this and immediately reported it to the homicide investigators who were working the case. One of the immediate questions asked of Hannah by investigators was the obvious. Why didn't you immediately call 911? Her simple answer was that the hospital or clinic was so close that she knew she could get there faster than an ambulance could be dispatched and get him there. Also, the Overtons were only in the trial period of the adoption process, so essentially they were only foster parents and did not have legal custody of Andrew and could not make any kind of medical decisions for the boy. The state and CPS had the custody. I'm not sure why this mattered. I mean, did it change if there was an emergency situation? I don't know. Hannah's behavior during her interviews and allegedly at the hospital while Andrew was being worked on also came under some scrutiny, and basically she came under attack. The nurses and doctors told police that while they were feverishly doing CPR and trying to save young Andrew's life, Hannah kept smirking and seemed to be smiling to herself and showed no concern at all when they realized he wasn't able to be saved. During her subsequent interviews and interrogations with the police, she giggled and smiled and laughed and at times even made jokes, and she just seemed downright jovial. Hannah and those closest to her insist that this is just a nervous tic or a nervous reaction Hannah has when put under extreme stress or pressure. Of course, the investigators, the media, and a lot of the public turned on the Overtons and were not buying this explanation. To make matters even worse, obviously investigators searched the Overton home, and this is when they found the result of Andrew's poop fest tantrum from a few nights before the incident. The poop sheets burned and stuck to the outside grill. The bed frame without a mattress that Andrew was made to sleep on while his own mattress dried from that same incident, and they were hearing from neighbors and the other children in the home about how the Overtons hosed Andrew down that day instead of properly bathing him. I'm not going to state my opinion on that again. They did nothing wrong. During the trial, the previous foster mother testified for the prosecution and said that while Andrew did have some behavioral issues, he really wasn't a difficult child at all and had no food issues whatsoever. I have a major problem with this because if you remember, everyone in the congregation was warning the Overtons and telling them to reconsider their decision to try and move forward with the adoption of Andrew. Where would they all have gathered information on Andrew, as the previous foster mother was the only member of the congregation who ever had fostered Andrew? If you remember, the pastor and his wife also backed out because of rumors of Andrew's terrible behavioral and issues. So who gave all of these people in the congregation who were so concerned for the Overtons all of this information, if not for this one and only woman who previously was fostering him? Does that make sense? Like, everyone who was warning them and the pastor and his wife who backed out, where did they get all of Andrew's information from? This one woman who was the only one that knew anything about him because she was fostering him. Now all of a sudden she comes forward and said there were no problems. Well, if there were no problems, why did you need the Overtons to take him from you? Just my opinion, come for me. The prosecution also said they wondered if because Andrew was the only non-biological son, if Hannah had considered him kind of expendable. But I mean, they were on a trial period. They could have easily gave him back and or backed out of the adoption process like the pastor and his wife did, and like the previous foster mother who pawned him off on the Overtons at their first sign of showing any interest in the boy did. But they didn't. They were so easily able to make one phone call and give that boy back. But they didn't. They stuck with it. Okay, they got frustrated. They did something weird. We're parents. Who doesn't do weird things as parents when you get frustrated, right? Is it just me? Am I the only one? Obviously not. The Overtons do weird things too, but anyone else? On September 7th, 2007, Hannah was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. She said she was so shocked she hadn't even said goodbye to her children that morning because she just knew she would be going home at the end of the day. I guess she was out on bail. Larry was also charged with murder, but after Hannah's eventual conviction, he took a plea deal and was given probation, and eventually the charges were dropped altogether. This is how several sources worded this, but I think it was more like he was given the probation, and if he completed it without any violations or issues at the end of it, this was taken off his record, be it by expungement or whatever other means. So I don't think the charges were dropped. I think he got through the probation and the charges went away or weren't on his permanent record. In this case, I also find it very unfair and unreasonable that the jury was only given two choices for Hannah, either first-degree intentional murder, which would be a life sentence, or total exoneration and acquittal. From what I know, from what I usually see in the cases I research and even just watch on TV, it's all I really watch, there's usually an in-between, especially in such a convoluted case as this one was. So that struck me as really odd. When it came out later on that the high sodium levels were only the result of testing stomach content and not blood, Hannah appealed her life sentence. Their church actually raised $1 million for her defense, and despite this, 3 of the best lawyers in the state took Hannah's case to defend her during this appeal, which obviously was granted because of this new evidence. One of the original prosecutors even testified in Hannah's defense at her new trial. It came out that the hospital, while Andrew was in his coma, was giving him saline through IV for at least 2 hours while he was in the coma. This obviously added even more to the levels of salt that were in his system, and let's not forget the baking ingredients he gorged himself on right before being given the Creole seasoning that day, or Creole seasoning, either one. In addition to all of this new evidence coming forward, it was also brought up that massive amounts of sodium/salt in someone's system prevents the blood from clotting, and therefore all of the bruises that the hospital staff attributed to abuse of Andrew were more than likely actually caused by the heroic attempts at resuscitation by hospital staff and medical technicians involved in trying to save his life. So basically, with that high of a salt content, any minor bump or bruise would have caused bruising under the skin, and the extensive and aggressive life-saving techniques employed by the medical staff probably caused all of the internal injuries as well. So essentially, it was determined that the bruising the staff and medical examiner saw all over Andrew was not there when he entered the hospital at all. He was not abused physically by the Overtons or at all. Hannah won her appeal in 2014 and was acquitted and declared innocent of all charges in the murder of Andrew Burd, which was now considered to be an accidental death. She was set free that very day after spending 7 years in prison. So what do you guys think of all this? I know I kind of blew right through it pretty fast, but I hope that I explained everything well enough for you to be able to come to your own conclusions and decisions. As always, let's discuss in the comments. Guys, please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it. My likes are very much lower than my views, so if we can kind of get those a little bit more even, I'd really appreciate it. Spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and make sure your notification bells are turned on so you get notified every time I post a video. Also, if you have any experiences or encounters with the paranormal and or supernatural, please email them to me at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com, and I will put them in a future version of Listener Encounters. It's a series I'm doing. I think I'm already on like 5 or 6 because you guys are so awesome. Please check out the description box for some important links. Justice for Caleb Smith, the 2-hour interview with April Arrington Steve and I did on missing persons and mysteries. No mother, no parent should have to investigate the death of their own child. Check it out if you haven't already. I know most of you have seen it, but the podcast is coming. Hang tight. Also, the live streams Steve and I do each week, Fireside Chat on Sunday from 7 to 8 p.m. Wednesday, we have a new unnamed live stream on my channel from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern time. So come and check that out. It's like a variety show, a little bit of everything. Fireside Chat, Campfire Tales, and Real Evil, whatever you guys want. On Friday nights, we have Campfire Stories on missing persons and mysteries from 7 to 8 p.m. Come and join in live or watch afterwards and leave us a comment. We do go back and check. Also, in the description box will be links to my PayPal and my Patreon for financial donations to the channel. Guys, thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate all of the constant support and love you guys give me on a daily and regular basis. Be kind, always choose kind, be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything, but also be kind to yourself. always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I will see you guys next time. Mwah. Bye-bye.